Hello and welcome to the video on a decision support tool for building leasing strategies to achieve the executive order mandate for federal government green buildings. At the moment, our nation faces two key issues: rising government debt and global climate change. Commercial buildings consume about 40% of the nation's energy supply and account for 38% of CO2 emissions in the U.S. Billions of dollars is spent on energy consumption. In fact, in 2011 alone, over $7 billion was spent on energy. Unless green building technologies become less expensive, building owners will not have incentive to convert their buildings. The building on the left is the current headquarters of the FAA. It is approximately 50 years old and uses a lot of energy to operate daily. With energy costs rising, this building will only require more money to stay in operation. The building on the right is of similar size and location, but it is a sustainable green building which research shows will use less electricity, water, and natural gas while improving employee job satisfaction. The goal of this project is to help the FAA move from leasing administrative buildings like the one on the left to new sustainable buildings like the one on the right. While doing this, we will also be satisfying the goals of Executive Order 13514, Leadership in Environmental, Energy, and Economic Performance. The purpose of this executive order is to promote energy security and safeguard the health of the nation's environment. FAA stands for Federal Aviation Administration. It is part of the Department of Transportation and maintains the nation's airspace. In 2011, its budget was about $16 billion and employed over 48,000 people. These employees are located in various types of buildings such as airport terminals and radar towers. They also have administrative offices located throughout the U.S., and those offices are standard commercial style buildings. Those are the buildings we will examine, specifically buildings leased directly from private lessors. There are 1,081 of those. The people in charge of overseeing the acquisition and execution of these leases are known as real estate contract officers, known as RECOs. Part of the process of lease acquisition is the evaluation of the terms of a lease to verify that its facilities as well as costs meet the requirements of the FAA. Currently, the main focus of their cost analysis is on upfront rent costs per square foot and not the cost over the entire life cycle. Here is a simplified diagram of the lease acquisition process. Our goal is to help the RECO to focus his efforts to obtain the leases that have the best chance of generating savings over the entire term of the lease and to provide a more complete information to aid the negotiations with the lessor. Here are the 30-year electricity price projections obtained for the Energy Information Administration, or EIA. The purple line represents high economic growth and the green line low economic growth. Regardless of the state of the economy in the future, energy prices are expected to rise. Older buildings are also an environmental concern. They were built using old technology and are inefficient, which can lead to excess CO2 emissions. In fact, commercial buildings account for 39.4% of total U.S. energy consumption, 38.1% of the nation's CO2 emissions, and 12.4% of the total water in the U.S. Green buildings, however, have been shown to lower operation expenses as much as 30%. They're also more energy efficient, lowering the amount of carbon emissions. This is the reason for Executive Order 13514. The President wants our nation's government to lead the way in green building technology. Executive Order 13514 was signed by President Barack Obama, and its main goals are to establish a strategic sustainability performance plan, to prioritize actions based on life cycle cost and return on investment, and our main focus, which is 15% of all buildings that are greater than 5,000 square feet, need to be converted to green buildings by fiscal year 2015. This chart shows a gap that will happen in 2015 if the current process is not changed. Our four main stakeholders in this project are the Oversight Group, which includes the White House and Congress, which expects steady progress towards these goals, which creates tension with the Implementation Group, which includes our main stakeholder, the FAA. They are expected to implement these directives in addition to their primary mission with no additional funding. The taxpayers who want their tax dollars to be used wisely to help decrease the national debt will hold the White House and Congress accountable in this process, and the green technology manufacturers. They are merely observers and waiting to see where they can best help and where the most money can be made. And this brings us to our problem. Out of 1,081 total leased buildings, 125 fall within the executive order. Our job is to help identify 15 to help the FAA achieve the 15% overall goal of green buildings. The actual status of the FAA progress is, as of fiscal year 2012, there is less than 1% of those direct leases that have been identified. And there is no no additional budget that will be appropriated for this process, and the current RICO approach to lease acquisition is only concerned with upfront costs and not life cycle costs. There is a need for a system to help RICOs analyze those life cycle costs and suggest the course of action to provide a win-win solution for all stakeholders. We have 3 design alternatives: the status quo, which nothing is done; renovation, in which the same building is renovated to upgrade its technology into green technology; and relocation to an existing high-performance building. Status quo does not meet executive order criteria, however the other 2 do. Here's a simplified version of our model, in which we have inputs from the real estate management system, the Energy Information Administration, the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey, and the General Services Administration to generate surrogate data, since the FAA does not track utility bills at this time. In Phase 2, the deterministic life cycle cost lease analysis, we take the inputs that are generated from Phase 1 and do a deterministic calculation based on those numbers, and we choose the top 20 to do a stochastic Monte Carlo simulation to generate probability of breaking even over the course of a lease. In the first row here we have our Phase 1 data, which is basically the lease properties and the number of the size of the buildings and the locations. The middle row is our computer values from Phase 2, and in Phase 3 we have our sensitivity analysis. We evaluated 125 buildings. We selected 20 buildings for our stochastic analysis. We ran the simulation 100,000 times. Here is an example of a lease in Pennsylvania that is 10 years long, approximately 15,000 square feet, and has 40 employees. Pennsylvania has a higher energy unit cost, which contributes positively to the probability of breaking even, which is 76%. Conversely, New Jersey has a comparable length lease, a comparable size building, and has twice the employees, but it has a lower energy unit cost, which drops the probability of breaking even to about 55%. Here's a confidence interval for the Pennsylvania case, in which we show the range of values that can be gotten from this building, and they range from a cost of $153,000 over the term of the life cycle of the lease to a potential savings of $323,000. Here is our sensitivity. You can see that 5.3% contribute to the Pennsylvania building. 5.3% of the cost of the building is energy costs. And in the New Jersey building, that drops to 3%, although capital and rent costs remain the same. This demonstrates that it's all about location. Ideally, we want to find a building with lower capital costs and higher energy costs. This will lead to the highest probability of breaking even. Here's a list of our top 15 results. You can see that the vast majority of them are less than 20,000 square feet, which is due to the lower cost of renovating a smaller building. The recommendations that we have is that the life cycle lease analysis is a much better estimate for evaluating these lease options. It's all about location and energy. Ideally, we want lower capital costs and higher energy costs. This gives us the highest probability of breaking even. We also want to target partial service leases, which are leases that do not include utility costs as part of the rent. If a full service lease, which is what includes utilities in the rent, is pursued, this passes the savings on to the lessor, and the FAA cannot reap the benefits of energy savings. If it is not possible to get a partial service lease, then the RICO should negotiate for a lower rent cost due to the energy savings or the length of the lease that's passed on to the lessor.